I pretended to be dying to see which family members would actually visit. Only the dog came every day. Last spring, when my grandmother passed away, I watched as relatives crawled out of the woodwork like ants finding dropped candy. Suddenly, everyone was devastated. Everyone had precious memories to share. Everyone claimed to be her favorite. The funeral home looked like a high school reunion where nobody aged gracefully. I sat there in my black dress, thinking about how she spent her final months calling each of these people, begging them to visit, and getting excuses about busy schedules and gas prices. That experience planted a seed of curiosity that grew into something darker over the following months. I started wondering who in my own family would actually show up if I needed them versus who would just send thoughts and prayers through Facebook messages. The question ate at me during sleepless nights when anxiety made my chest tight and my breathing shallow. I would lie there making mental lists of people I considered close family and trying to predict their responses to various crisis scenarios. The plan started forming during one of those middle-of-the-night worry sessions in August. I decided I would fake a serious illness and see who actually cared enough to visit versus who would just send generic get-well cards from the grocery store. My apartment had been feeling like a prison anyway since I started working from home. So having visitors would either prove I had people who loved me or confirm my worst fears about being alone in this world. I spent weeks researching different conditions online, reading medical forums and patient stories until I settled on something that sounded serious but not immediately fatal. The kind of diagnosis that would make people drop everything and rush to your bedside if they truly cared about you. I practiced looking pale and tired in the mirror, perfecting the right amount of weakness in my voice when I spoke on the phone. The hardest part was calling my mom that September morning and hearing her voice crack when I delivered the news. She lived 3 states away with her husband and had been distant since remarrying 5 years ago. I described symptoms I had memorized from medical websites, used terminology I had researched, and painted a picture of someone facing an uncertain future who really needed family support right now. Her response was exactly what I expected, but still hurt to hear. She expressed concern through the phone, but immediately started listing reasons why she couldn't visit right away. Her husband had an important work conference that month, their dog had just had surgery, and flying was so expensive these days. She promised to send care packages and call every day, which she did for exactly 4 days before the calls became every few days, then weekly. My older brother lived 2 hours away and had always been my closest family member growing up. We used to spend entire summers building forts in the backyard and creating elaborate games that only made sense to us. When I called him with my fake diagnosis, he sounded genuinely upset and promised to drive down that weekend. Friday came and went with no sign of him. Then Saturday, then Sunday evening, he texted saying something came up with his kids and he would try to make it the following weekend. That pattern continued for 3 weeks straight. He would commit to visiting, I would clean my apartment and buy extra groceries, then receive a last-minute cancellation about work emergencies or family obligations. Each broken promise felt like a small betrayal, confirming suspicions I had carried for years about where I ranked in his priority list. My sister had moved across the country for her career, and we had grown apart over the past decade. She sent a beautiful bouquet of flowers with a card expressing love and support, followed by several caring text messages asking about my condition. But when I mentioned feeling lonely and scared, she suggested I join online support groups for people with similar diagnoses. The irony was not lost on me that she was recommending I find comfort from strangers on the internet. Extended family members fell into predictable categories based on their responses. Aunts and uncles sent generic messages expressing concern, but offering no concrete help. Cousins I had grown up with shared my fake medical updates on social media with crying face emojis, but never picked up the phone to actually call. Everyone seemed to care deeply, as long as caring did not require any real effort or sacrifice on their part. The loneliness during those weeks was heavier than I had anticipated. Even though I had orchestrated this situation, the isolation felt completely real and suffocating. I would wake up each morning hoping today would be different, that someone would surprise me by showing up unannounced with soup or flowers or just their presence. Instead, I got delivery drivers bringing groceries and the occasional neighbor asking if I was okay since they had not seen me around much lately. But then something unexpected started happening around the third week of my charade. My neighbor's dog, a golden retriever named something I had never bothered to learn, began appearing at my door every morning around 9. He would sit on my doormat with his tail wagging, looking up at me with those impossibly sweet brown eyes that seemed to see straight through to my soul. At first, I assumed he was just being friendly or hoping for treats like dogs do. But as days passed, his visits became more purposeful and consistent. He would arrive at exactly the same time each morning, spend an hour lying on my doormat, then return again in the evening before dinner. His owner, an elderly woman who lived alone in the apartment next door, mentioned that he had never shown this behavior before with any other neighbor. The dog's daily visits became the highlight of my increasingly empty days. While family members sent occasional texts asking about my condition, this furry creature was showing up rain or shine, never making excuses or breaking promises. He did not care that I was supposedly sick, did not treat me differently, and certainly did not send thoughts and prayers from a distance. He just showed up, day after day, with unconditional presence. During the fourth week, something shifted in my understanding of what was happening. The dog's owner knocked on my door one evening, looking concerned and slightly embarrassed. She explained that her pet had been acting strange lately, spending most of his time at my door instead of playing in the courtyard like usual. She had noticed I seemed to be home more often and wondered if everything was okay with me. That conversation became the first honest one I had with another person in weeks. I found myself opening up about feeling isolated and disconnected from family, though I could not reveal the full truth about my deception. She listened without judgment and mentioned that her dog had always been sensitive to people who were going through difficult times. Apparently, he had done something similar when another neighbor went through a divorce the previous year. The realization hit me gradually over the following days. This animal, who owed me nothing and had no obligation to care about my well-being, was demonstrating more loyalty and consistency than any of my human family members. He was not sending cards or making phone calls or sharing posts on social media. He was simply showing up, which was apparently more than I could expect from people who shared my DNA. Week 5 brought an unexpected complication when my brother finally decided to visit unannounced. I had grown comfortable in my routine of fake illness, sleeping late and wearing pajamas most days, so his sudden appearance at my door sent me into panic mode. I had to quickly transform back into someone who looked appropriately sick, which was harder than I expected after weeks of actually feeling depressed and isolated. His visit lasted exactly 2 hours and felt more like a duty call than genuine concern. He spent most of the time checking his phone and making comments about how I looked better than he expected. When he left, he promised to visit again soon, but we both knew it would not happen. The dog watched this entire interaction from his usual spot on my doormat, and I swear I saw judgment in his eyes about my brother's obvious discomfort. The 6th week brought the most unexpected twist of all. My elderly neighbor knocked on my door again, this time with a serious expression that made my stomach drop. She had been to her doctor that morning and received some concerning news about her own health. Nothing immediately life-threatening, but serious enough to require surgery and a lengthy recovery period. She was wondering if I might be able to help care for her dog during her absence. The irony was overwhelming. Here I was, faking a serious illness to test people's loyalty, and someone who barely knew me was asking for help with the one creature who had shown me genuine, consistent care. I agreed immediately, of course, though I felt like the biggest fraud in the world. The dog would need to stay with me for at least 6 weeks while his owner recovered from surgery. Living with the dog full-time revealed even more about the nature of loyalty and companionship. He did not care whether I was having a good day or bad day, whether I was productive or lazy, whether I was happy or sad. He just wanted to be near me, to share space and time without conditions or expectations. Meanwhile, my family members continued their pattern of occasional check-ins, followed by long stretches of silence. Around week 7, guilt started eating away at my initial satisfaction with the experiment. The dog's owner was facing real health challenges, while I was pretending to have problems that did not exist. My family members were genuinely worried about me, even if they were not expressing it in ways I wanted or expected. I had created this elaborate deception to prove a point about loyalty, but I was starting to realize the point was more complicated than I had initially thought. The revelation that changed everything came during week 8, when I overheard my brother talking to my mom on the phone. He was calling from his car outside my apartment building, and I could hear him through my thin walls. He was telling her how worried he was about me, how he had been trying to visit more often, but every time he came I seemed to be sleeping or unavailable. He felt helpless and guilty about not being able to do more. That conversation shattered my assumptions about his lack of visits. I had been interpreting his broken promises as evidence that he did not care, but he had actually been trying to respect what he thought was my need for rest and recovery. He had been stopping by regularly, but I had been so focused on my predetermined visiting schedule that I missed his actual efforts to connect. The realization made me feel sick, with guilt and confusion. The dog, meanwhile, continued his routine of morning and evening visits, now extended throughout the day since he was staying with me. He had no idea about my internal crisis or moral dilemma. He just existed in the present moment, offering companionship without complications or hidden agendas. His simple presence became a stark contrast to the complex emotional manipulation I had created with my human relationships. Week 9 brought another unexpected development when my sister called to say she was flying out for a surprise visit. She had been saving money for months and wanted to spend a long weekend with me before my next round of treatments. The panic I felt was different from my brother's surprise visit, because her trip represented significant financial sacrifice and advance planning. She was demonstrating exactly the kind of care and prioritization I had been testing for. But now, I felt terrible about receiving it under false pretenses. Her visit was beautiful and heartbreaking at the same time. She had researched my fake condition extensively and came prepared with books, movies, and activities designed to lift my spirits. She cooked elaborate meals, cleaned my apartment, and spent hours just sitting with me talking about childhood memories and future plans. The dog observed all of this with his usual calm presence, seemingly approving of her genuine care and attention. During her visit, my sister mentioned how proud she was of how I was handling my health challenges with such grace and positivity. She said she had been inspired by my strength and had been telling her friends about my courage in the face of adversity. Each compliment felt like a knife twisting in my chest, because I knew I was receiving praise for fabricating a crisis that was causing real pain to people who loved me. The breaking point came on her last day when she broke down crying while packing her suitcase. She confessed that she had been struggling with depression since moving away and had been feeling disconnected from family. My illness had actually brought her closer to everyone because it reminded her what was truly important in life. She thanked me for bringing the family together and promised to visit more often in the future, health crisis or not. That night, after she left, I sat on my couch with the dog curled up beside me and realized I had created something much more complex than a simple loyalty test. I had inadvertently revealed that my family members did care about me, just not always in the ways I expected or wanted. Their expressions of love came through phone calls, flowers, cards, and sacrifices that I had dismissed because they did not match my predetermined criteria for meaningful support. The dog, who had been my constant companion for weeks, represented a different kind of relationship entirely. His loyalty was pure and uncomplicated, based on presence rather than grand gestures or emotional expressions. He had taught me that sometimes the most meaningful support comes from simply showing up consistently, without fanfare or promises that might be broken. His daily visits had sustained me through my fake crisis in ways that dramatic declarations of love could not. Week 10 forced me to confront the full scope of what I had done and decide how to move forward. The dog's owner was recovering well from surgery and would be able to take him back soon. My family members continued their patterns of care and concern, unaware that their love was being measured against impossible standards. I had proven that people cared about me, but I had also proven that I was capable of elaborate deception and emotional manipulation. The decision to end the charade came gradually rather than all at once. I started mentioning small improvements in my condition during phone calls, describing how treatments were working better than expected. I began venturing out of my apartment more often, taking the dog for walks around the neighborhood and gradually returning to normal activities. The transition back to health had to be believable and gradual to avoid suspicion. Returning the dog to his owner was harder than I expected. He had become such an integral part of my daily routine that my apartment felt empty without his presence. His owner was grateful for the care I had provided and mentioned that he seemed happier and more settled than before his stay with me. She suggested that perhaps we had been good for each other during our respective difficult times. The aftermath of my experiment lasted longer than the deception itself. I found myself analyzing every interaction with family members through the lens of what I had learned about their capacity for care and my own expectations. Phone calls that used to frustrate me because they were too short or infrequent became precious connections to people who genuinely worried about my well-being. I started appreciating the flowers and cards that had once seemed like empty gestures. My relationship with the dog continued even after he returned to his owner. He still visited my doormat occasionally, though not with the same daily dedication he had shown during my fake illness. His owner and I became friends, bonding over our shared experience of depending on each other during difficult times. She never knew the full truth about my deception, but she understood that we had both been lonely and had found comfort in unexpected companionship. The guilt about lying to my family never completely disappeared, but it evolved into something more productive over time. I started reaching out to them more often, making phone calls instead of waiting for them to call me. I planned visits to see my brother and his kids, and I scheduled regular video calls with my sister. Instead of testing their loyalty, I began actively demonstrating my own care and commitment to our relationships. Looking back on those 10 weeks, I realized the experiment revealed more about my own fears and expectations than it did about my family's capacity for love. I had been so focused on proving that I was alone and unloved that I had missed evidence of genuine care and concern. The dog's daily visits had been meaningful precisely because they were uncomplicated and consistent, but human relationships require different kinds of understanding and forgiveness. The most important lesson came from recognizing that loyalty and love express themselves differently in different relationships. My mom's phone calls and care packages represented her way of showing concern from a distance. My brother's attempts to visit, even when they fell through, demonstrated his desire to be present despite his own complicated life. My sister's flowers and eventual surprise visit showed love expressed through both small gestures and grand sacrifices. The dog had been the perfect companion during my manufactured crisis because he offered presence without judgment or expectation. But human relationships require more complex navigation, including the ability to forgive broken promises, appreciate imperfect gestures, and understand that love does not always look like what we think it should look like. The dog's simple loyalty had been beautiful and healing, but it could not replace the messy, complicated, deeply meaningful connections I had with my family. In the end, I learned that testing people's loyalty is less important than choosing to believe in it and nurture it. The dog came every day because that was his nature and his way of showing care. My family members showed care in their own ways, shaped by their own limitations and circumstances. Both forms of love were real and valuable, even if they looked nothing like each other. The experiment taught me that sometimes the most profound loyalty comes from the most unexpected sources, but it also revealed that I had been surrounded by love all along. I just had to learn how to recognize it in all its imperfect, complicated, beautifully human forms.